Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Leadership in Aviation podcast. I have a repeat guest today. It's the first time I've ever done this, had someone on who I've had before, and I am so thrilled. I've connected in a deeper way with Sarah Kalmeta over the last couple of months as our paths keep crossing and our visions keep aligning with one another. And it is so fun to have a collaborator in the coaching space, someone to share ideas with, to really be able to take this industry to the next level. And Sarah, you are next level in so many ways. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Renee. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, when you and I talked several years ago on this podcast, you were blazing trails in Asia, and you have pivoted a few times since then. You have a company called Pivot Point now. You're known as Sarah the Pivoter. You've changed your hairstyle just a little bit. I mean, there are just some fun things going on in your life. Where in the world are you?
Well, right now I'm dialing in from New Orleans. I'm here on a road trip to go to my best friend's wedding, but I'm based in Austin, Texas now.
I love it. And I used to be there. I think I moved
Yes.
I moved away right when you
we crossed paths.
But regardless, we're in the same state now, which is a ton of fun. And tell our listeners a little bit about what you're doing with Pivot Point right now. How are you helping people in the industry?
So with Pivot Point, started this concept because I saw people around me really just treading water, myself included, and realized that there was a lack of awareness because we are just so busy, right? Business aviation is dynamic, it's fun, it's exciting, but it's nonstop. It's 24/7. And anyone who works in a STEM field is really a logical thinker, type A driven, and they like process and procedure. And a lot of times that goes out the window in business aviation when change is happening rapidly, right? We're finding solutions. And so I call myself a relentless truth seeker. I'm really here to help counsel people in finding what those themes are in their life, those repeating patterns that they've fallen into, so that we can uncover what it is that they can do, which is often just a little tiny pivot, 1 degree change in their life to have a system of success so that they can calm the nervous system down and have fun in what they're doing instead of constantly being on the burnout cycle.
And this is from a personal experience that you had, like very close to burnout or burnout.
I would say I was there. I was 100% there. And I hit that edge twice in my career, in 2010 and then again in 2018, 2019. The last one, most recently, I was in Asia. I was traveling anywhere between 70 to 90% of the time. And I just woke up one day and realized, okay, I'm married. I have this beautiful flat. I'm traveling to all these exotic places. I'm making great money. I have the title, like all of these things I wanted to hit by 35, and I had hit them by 29, 30, and was like, okay, now what? Oh, there's another peak to climb. Do I really want to climb that peak? So I started to really question everything, and I was just so tired. I mean, my body started to break down. I was having pain, not sleeping. I think back to why I was not sleeping. I was having like 9 Nespressos a day. Okay, that is it. Don't do that. that is not good for you. And so then taking, melatonin or sleep aid to go to sleep. So it's constantly just yo-yoing back and forth between different hyper states. And it was this unraveling, I've since then separated from that partner. I don't live in Asia anymore. I set up my own business so that I could work with my energy instead of against my energy.
I love that. And I love that you were self-aware enough, or you hit a spot where you said, oh, something is not working here. Because so often we think that something's not working. And so many people in business aviation, I've noticed, are very stoic. Yes. And they say, something's not working, I'm just going to power through. Right. And don't find the courage to make a change or just flat out refuse to make the change, how do you advise people to dig into that courage?
Yeah, it's difficult because we don't know what we don't know, right? And we are very good at convincing ourselves of things that we want to believe. I mean, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, the keychain, the magnet, all of it, right? So really what I do to help people uncover those hidden unconscious motivators is to dive into what's their intention and what is the motivation. Because a lot of times what we want is this pretty outer package. It's usually some form of external validation, or when I get this, I will be happy, or society will respect me, etc. So really going back internally to what are their values? How do they want to be living life? What is the feeling that they're after? Because when we can uncover that intention and those motivating factors, and they're tied into the core values of the person, that makes the decision-making process really easy. And we no longer kind of flip-flop back and forth because we're not strongly attached to anything and anchored by it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, like, we have to be willing to make change. And,
absolutely,
that's a really tough thing, because I can come up with and have come up with, like, what are my life values? Like, what do I want to be true about myself at the end of my life? But looking at what I want that to be, and then looking at where I am right now are pretty different sometimes for some of us, right? Or at least in some seasons they are. And kind of making the flight plan, if you will, to get from one to the other, and being able to take those steps is really important. And one thing that you and I have talked about is that doesn't have to be in isolation.
Right.
And so I think it's really important that we have other people around us who are like-minded, who are interested in achieving the same kinds of things that we are. I think that's really important. And you and I have talked a little bit about the advice about this, but I'd love for you to share your perspective here.
Absolutely. So, we've all heard that adage, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And it's really true. I mean, think about little children. They learn through osmosis. Last night I watched a funny video about toddlers who are swearing, because clearly there's an adult in their life that very often uses these phrases. And so they mimic, right? And that's what we end up doing. And it's usually unconscious because we're part of this little group, right? And in order to be accepted, we mirror behavior. We do things that we know the other person will like or accept. And so when you're on this growth journey, sometimes it can be very lonely, whether you have your own business or you're simply on a personal growth journey and evolving yourself as a person. So it's really important to set good boundaries with the people in your life that may be naysayers or may look at you and go, why do you want to climb Mount Everest? I would never do that. I want to go to the beach, and relax. And that's fine. Everyone is different. Everyone has different mountains to climb, but you need to find the mountain climbers that want to go on that same path with you, and even ones who have been there before, so that as you get to those sections where you're like, what do I do here? Oh my gosh, that's a sheer cliff and it looks like I have no way up. All of a sudden you see somebody coming down, you can get information about how they did it. That may not be the best way for you to do it, but now you can start to learn, hey, there's this tool available. There's this other path I didn't know about. It wasn't on the map, right, that I made.
Yeah.
And so very often we set a plan and we're like, this is how it has to be, right? And we try to, the plan is in the box, stay in the box. But life happens and we're not meant to stay in boxes, right? So getting comfortable with that discomfort, finding people around you that can help, not just, not people who are just going to tell you you're doing great or validate your discomfort, but people who are going to hold up a mirror and really challenge you and say, hey, René, you said that integrity is really important to you. Why did you just say that to this person? That's actually not fully true. And then you can go, you know what? You're right. Even that small little spin is not helping me be who I want to be. And the way you do one thing is the way you do all things. So it will trickle over. And it's easy. Again, like I've done it myself, convince myself like, oh, it's no big deal, or no, it doesn't matter. It's for the good of the other person. I'm being nice to them. But if you're being nice to somebody else, very often that comes at the expense of you. And so it's better and more important to be kind. And that will take both people into equation.
Oh, that's such good advice. I love that so much. Well, you've been doing some one-on-one coaching with a number of people in the industry from all different sorts of job types. Tell me a little bit about some of the types of things that you see in that one-on-one coaching. You and I have talked about this a number of times, how important it is to have a coach. And you just mentioned a character trait that I call being coachable.
Yes.
What kinds of things do you find that you're successfully coaching on?
I love that you brought up this point about being coachable, because what can happen, especially when you start to become an expert, you're viewed as an expert or an industry leader, is we start to get comfortable, or we start to think we know it all, right? And that's a very dangerous place to be, because that means we stop learning, we stop growing, and then all of a sudden people beneath start to surpass, which creates a rift in the identity that you hold, and then creates a defensive position. And we've all come across those people who, are always defensive, always posturing, and that's exhausting. My goodness, is it exhausting, right? Imposter syndrome really rears its ugly head. So one of the things that I've noticed is there tends to be a trend. Most of my clients tend to be 45 and above. And I think this is mostly due to the fact that it is now safe for this generation to explore what they're feeling, to explore celebrating their success, and not just doing it because they have to, or like water off a duck's back, no big deal, like that's what's expected of me, right? Because you have to remember, business aviation was born from and developed from largely ex-military, right? It was driven from that. So very different mental model of the world, a chain of command, black and white, suck it up, buttercup, all of this mentality. So it's really giving themselves permission to feel, to play with these different expressions of themselves, and to start to explore what it is that they truly want. A lot of these clients of mine are nearing retirement. And so they're all of a sudden faced with, what am I going to do with myself? Right. And, I'm going to call the elephant in the room. There are some people in the industry who will not retire because they have nothing else in their life to do. And at leadership earlier this year, one of the speakers asked, how many people had personal hobbies, and maybe 10% of the room put their hand up. But when she asked how many people had a hobby of aviation, the whole room put their hand up. I mean, we are full of passion. We love it. We breathe it. Like the smell of jet fuel gets us going. And that's wonderful. But you are not one thing. So really exploring these different facets, think of a diamond, right? All these different facets that can reflect the light and sparkle like brilliantly, that always catches your eye. And when people are bright like that, we go and we look and we're like, what are they having? I want some of that, right? Where do they get that energy and that glow? And that comes from exploring these different aspects. It's not all about work. Nobody's on their deathbed going, man, I wished I sent one more email that Friday at 7 p.m., right? It doesn't happen. And we hear it, but we intellectualize it and we don't embody it. So really practicing these behaviors, and it's called a practice for a reason, because we have to consistently do something in order for it to become a habit. And then what we're also doing is reflecting along the way, making sure that it stays in alignment. Because I think so many of us set a goal and a target, and we're like, I'm on this road. And then we don't stop for any detours. And then we get to the end of the road and we're like, well, wait a second, where do I go from here? Right. So really uncovering the motivation behind what they want has been a big part of it. And it often stems back to the programming they received in early childhood, in their teen years, and, were they military or civilian trained? So we dig into all of that to start to uncover their complex identity that they may have never considered besides their job.
I love that. It sounds like the transformation that you're really seeing is people finding a richer version of themselves.
Yes, that's a good way
So
to describe it.
that leads me to something that I know is true about you, and that's that you're finding a richer version of yourself by
Yes.
pivoting enough times to be pulling on something from your youth.
Yes.
What is this fascination with space?
Oh, goodness. So space, as you can see, I probably just like turned on like a light bulb. I have loved it since I was little. My very first two words were for star and airplane. So my mom realized that I was saying sta and ba, and she's like, oh, she's mixing up these words. But then one day she noticed that I was pointing to one that moved, and that's what ba was, right? So I didn't know I didn't know how to say airplane, so I just created a word to match. And so since I was little, this was my fascination, looking up in the sky. So I've already played with airplanes for the last 15 years, and now I'm starting to play with rockets and aerospace, which is really, really fun. For a long time, as you mentioned before, I was in Asia. And, the space industry doesn't exist to the same extent it does now in the US with commercialization of space. Clearly, I was not going to be joining the Chinese space program. So, it was one of those things that I just kind of didn't think about for a long time, and as the last kind of 5-10 years, space started to evolve, I was paying attention. I very clearly remember a night on Llama Island in Hong Kong at 2 a.m. with a friend of mine, like trying to find signal on the one of the mountaintops of this little island in Hong Kong to watch the SpaceX launch, right, for Inspiration 4. And so the passion was there, but it just didn't occur to me as a possibility. Then I'm at Schedulers and Dispatchers, which is where I started my career. That was the first conference I went to with MBAA. I started as a scheduler and dispatcher with Jet Edge 1.0 way back in the day. And, I really reconnected to the roots of my origin story. And Michelle Mace-Curran was the keynote speaker. And she talked about her career as a fighter pilot, which was one of my big choice options, when I was in school. And, she had these cool videos, and I was like, yeah, this is like, she's my spirit animal, right? And she led us through this exercise by the end of it to reconnect us to a dream that we maybe put on a shelf or didn't go after because we were afraid of not getting it and all those things. And so immediately space came up. And I had this conversation with Ed Bolin, right after, telling him how much I enjoyed it. And I was telling him about this, activation. And he's like, Sarah, with you, it's not an if, it's just a when. I think you can do it. And I was like, yeah, cool. Thanks, Ed, like feeling really good. And he's like, do you know Dr. Cyan Proctor? And I said, no. He's like, well, I can introduce you at leadership. Are you going? I said, I am now. So, I go to leadership, and, he and someone else were helping me to try to coordinate to meet her, and have some time to chat with her. And I, get a message like, oh, I haven't seen her yet. And I'm like, no worries. I'm sure I'll run into her at some point. And I literally look up from my phone. She's standing right in front of me. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go say hi. Right. My personality. I just go up and talk to anyone. And we
so
chat.
For people who don't know, tell Cyan's story.
So Dr. Cyan Proctor is one of the astronauts on Inspiration 4, which was the first all-civilian space mission with SpaceX. And Jared Isaacson was behind it. They raised money for St. Jude's for cancer research. And she also piloted the aircraft, was a co-pilot with Jared. So she went from flying a Cessna 172 to flying Inspiration 4 and the Dragon. I mean, talk about a leap, right? So her story was fascinating. And she won her seat through submitting a poem, and it went viral on Twitter, and they called her up and she was selected. So there are now non-traditional paths to going into space. Obviously, with Starship, that's going to completely change the game, but with just commercialization, it's very, very different. So, I was very fascinated to talk to her and just hear about her story and, all the synchronicities. Here she is, we're talking, and I asked if I could take a photo. She says yes. And then I'm like, oh, would you like me to airdrop it to you? Being mindful that I don't need to get her contact info necessarily. I can get her email or something. She's like, oh, I'll give you my cell phone number. You said you lived in Austin. I'll be there for South by Southwest. Let's hang out. And I was like, on the inside, I'm like, like a little girl, fangirling inside. And I was just like, they also had like real cool, at least I think I was, she probably saw right through it. And we hung out in Austin. We hung out at the Analog Astronaut Conference just a few weeks back at Biosphere 2 in Arizona. So we've gotten to know each other a little bit better. And it's just really opened up my eyes to, just like business aviation, all the different avenues and roles that I could have and explore this passion. I don't need to go to space tomorrow. It'll happen at some point. This is like a knowing in my bones. People might think like I'm crazy. I am, I'm going to admit that, but that's what my dreams are. And that's where my sight is. And so it's been really fun to explore this space, literally, and to have the space to consider different options rather than like, no, I have to be an astronaut. That's the thing. That's the only thing that will happen. I could go to space being an engineer, being a biologist, right? There's so many different things in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years that could take place.
Oh my gosh. It's so fun to watch your passion about this, and having seen like this star being birthed in your energy over the last couple months as you've been exploring this. So I just want to pull a couple of lessons from this, because I think it's really important to reflect on what you did. One, you gave yourself some space to remember some dreams that you've had, and think about, what was I really passionate about before all the pressures of life descended upon me, and really explore that. Like, and then the next thing you did was you verbalized it to somebody who could probably recognize that would be a possibility for you, or introduce you to somebody powerful in that space. And that's Ed Bullen, who's the CEO of the National Business Aviation Association. And then the next thing you did was show up to meet that person and purposefully and dynamically engage. And you weren't asking her to mentor you. You weren't, making demands on her. You were genuinely engaging with her story, which people love. Yes. So you thought about your dream, you verbalized your dream, you sought someone who was doing your dream, and then you continued to follow up with that person and with exploring more things. And now you're engaging in a curriculum that someone who's going to be flying is doing, and learning the mindset, right, of what astronauts have to go through. Tell me about that.
Yeah. And thank you for summarizing those points, because very often I think one of the pitfalls of growth is that people go through the motions, they do the things, but they don't recognize just how profound it is. And it doesn't have to be a huge thing that you're doing, right? A lot of times we only celebrate the big things, like a birthday, a promotion, a marriage, or a divorce, right? We don't celebrate the day-to-day activities. But what about showing up for your son or daughter's soccer game? What about showing up for date night? What about simply being on time for a meeting? Like, these are all things we can celebrate. And so it's about training yourself to look for those wins. And I know you and I have talked about that. So that's really important. I wanted to highlight that. But the verbalization has been the biggest thing. I literally, from that point, after speaking with Ed, started talking about this to anyone that would listen, basically. It's posted on my social media, it's talked about it in person when people asked what I was up to. And it's led to some amazing introductions and what seems like coincidences, but really is just synchronicity. But it's really that power of, when you verbalize something, you can draw it towards you. When you just keep it in, nobody knows. No one knows who to introduce you to or what you might be going after. And you don't know, again, what you don't know, and the people that they're connected to. So that's been one of the most powerful things these last few months, is speaking about it. And so this training that I'm in, this curriculum is called Space Kind. It's by Loretta Whitesides. She is a founder astronaut with Virgin Galactic. She's been doing this training with Virgin Galactic for a few years, then brought it out public. So the group is called Space Kinders, right? We have a name. And it's an 8-week hero's journey, which is going through, you have to really evaluate your identity. And, you go through this path of like a death and rebirth, and it's the transformation. And going in this group with people who are in space, not in space, maybe I've been in it for a long time. It has just been really fascinating to connect with people in this way. And so this last week, chapter 3, we explored the dark side. So another thing I love about it is it started on May 4th. So may the 4th be with you, right? A lot of Star Wars terminology, and it's just fun. And so, we had this homework assignment to interview someone in our life to explore our dark side, meaning asking this person, what do you see as my strengths and the things that I can work on? And letting yourself really receive it, right? So before that, we had some other homework of, being fully present, using Jedi listening skills and understanding some of our trigger points so that as we get to this interview, we can actually receive it and not just start defending ourselves. Because anytime we defend something, that is the ego in crisis, right? And you're like rigidly trying to hold on to something. But when you can accept that feedback and go, yes, I do that. Thank you for sharing that with me. It's really powerful, because when you own the things that are hard, the things that you don't like about yourself, that's when the power of it goes away. And that's when you can actually change it. But the more you defend that you don't do something, or no, that habit doesn't exist in you, that trait isn't there, that's when it's winning. That's when it's driving the show.
Oh, that's like a deep sword that cuts away at a lot of things right there. What powerful work to do. What did you learn about yourself?
So I learned a lot of things so far. And some of this, it's interesting because learning comes in layers, right? It's like a video game. In the beginning, level 1, super easy, right? You hit the boss once or you shoot the boss once and you win, you go to the next level. But as you go up, all of a sudden you need more tools, you need strategy. You can't just, it's not as easy. And you might even be fighting the same battle, but now it's more complex and nuanced, right? So that's how life is. Think about a house. When you're on the first floor, you can only see so far to the right and left of the street. But if you go up on the 3rd floor, you might be able to see onto the other street, right? Because you have more visibility. So I started to recognize some patterns that I thought I had fixed or worked through, and yet realized where they were still appearing. And so one of the core themes I really identified with in the book was Loretta talks about anger was her kind of quick response to a lot of things. And I realized that more often in relationship, less in the workplace, but frustration and anger were my go-to emotions. I felt safe in those emotions. So if I didn't like something, I used to be very much a my way or the highway type of person in relationships specifically. I was like, well, you don't like it? Okay, goodbye. Go over there. So if people were like, okay, I'm willing to go do that, then it was great. And if they were not, then it was like stonewall, right? Not a great thing. So I learned where in certain relationships, like with my mother or with my partner, it's usually the people that you love the most because you'll be forgiven more than people at work or like a friend, where I would use frustration or maybe even a bit of anger still by shutting down or by being flippant to try to get what I wanted, right? It was all about control and creating safety. So I really started to work on creating safety for myself from an emotional standpoint in different situations once I recognized what they were. And the results have been phenomenal, because the repeating pattern that has been there for, in some cases, 30 plus years did not happen again. And I was sitting there like, oh, could have been this easy the whole time. And, it's not nice to admit that I've done those things, that I've used anger or frustration to try to control a situation or feel important, right? Because if you are angry, what happens? People have to walk on eggshells around you. They modify their behavior, their interaction with you. So now you feel significant. But what's the reason for you not feeling significant? Where did that come from? So really exploring at what point you adopted that belief. And that's been really powerful for me because well, when I can give myself a significance, I don't need it from other people. So therefore, anger is not a strategy that I need to use.
Oh, that's powerful. So I can see that that would translate very easily to a workplace that is riddled with people who have a my way or the highway mentality, especially in my generation and above, who really feel like they've done all the things, they have all the experience, they write the paychecks, they get to make all the rules. And I think that it's actually very detrimental to workplace engagement and a positive workplace culture when someone in leadership has that kind of a mentality. So what are a couple of steps? And I'm going to ask this from two perspectives. What are some steps that if I'm like, yeah, I kind of recognize that in myself as a leader, what are some steps that I can take? Or if I'm on the receiving end of that, and I recognize that in a leader that I don't feel like I have the ability to address it with, what are some things that I could do there to help myself or even help that leader?
These are beautiful questions. Thank you. So the first question is, if you recognize it in yourself, I would recommend doing an exercise where you take a piece of paper and you write, I am / I do. So I am is going to usually be what you identify as. So I am a business owner. I am a leader. I am male. I am female. I'm an astronaut, whatever it is, right? You'll find that a lot of times these are actually things that you do, but this is where we start. So then you write down all these things, because then you're going to morph into, I am smart, I am shy, I am innovative, right? And you'll come up with all these words. Go look up adjectives and see which ones really land for you. How would you describe yourself? And then start thinking, how would other people describe you? And maybe even go to a few close friends, maybe a mentor, your partner, and say, hey, what are 5 adjectives that if you were describing me to somebody else, you would use? And see what they give you, what they offer you. And remember, it's how you receive it. Just say thank you. Even if you don't agree with them, say thank you. And really spend some time to look at this list and then break it down. Okay, what are traits and what are actually things you're doing? Because they're separate. And recognize that even the trait we often over-identify with, like, I am strong, I am resilient. But you don't need to be that identity all the time. You are doing things that make you resilient. So it's still an action, right? And this helps you to recognize that this is a behavior, it's a choice, and you can change that if you want to, but you have to be willing to do the work and to understand that it may not be comfortable all the time, right? You are familiar with this pattern. It's easy. It's like a vinyl record. When you put a vinyl record on, you put the needle down, it can only go one way, right? It's going to go around in a circle until it gets to the end of the record. It will play those songs in that order. It's not like iTunes or Spotify that can jump around between albums, artists, songs. So recognizing that, hey, this needle's been put down. Wait a second. I don't want to listen to this song right now. Let me consciously take it off. I'm going to switch this record to a different run. In the beginning, that takes a lot of energy, focus, and attention. But eventually you can have a conversation and change that record and it's fine. It's smooth. Nobody even notices that you're doing it. You don't have to stop what you're saying to focus so intently on the action. So eventually it becomes easier, but really being kind to yourself, compassionate. A lot of times we beat ourselves up. We look at this list and we're like, man, this person said that I'm this and they're right. Like I'm always angry or I'm really stubborn and I don't listen. At the time you didn't have tools to make you aware. And so you couldn't fix it because you simply didn't know it was there. Now the flashlight's been put onto it. You can take steps to rectify. So the compassion piece is critical, which definitely for some people, I think really anyone 30 and above struggles with this because we were taught anger is bad, being sad. These are things you do in private. These are not things that you ever show to anybody. It's everything is awesome, especially in America. Be happy all the time. And that's toxic positivity. So recognizing for yourself, being compassionate, spending some time to really reflect. Now, if you have someone in your life, a leader, or maybe not even a leader, but a colleague who you recognize this behavior in, if you go and tell them, I can tell you right now, they will defend their identity. You will get nowhere. It's not going to help. But if there's something that's really triggering about another person, what I would invite you to do is look at the behavior and be honest with yourself. Where do you see that in yourself? Because we are often triggered by the behavior that we don't like about ourselves. So for example, if you're triggered by somebody being late all the time, where in your own life are you late? Because it's usually anger that you have for your own behavior that you're directing at somebody else. So that would be my starting recommendation. And obviously there's more that you can do. For communication, I recommend the book Crucial Conversations to everybody. That's my #1 book. It's 99 pages, very simple English, comes in different languages. There is no excuse to not read it quickly and absorb the information, and it will change your life. It is the top communication book I've ever come across because it is so simple to implement.
Agree. That's a favorite of mine as well. I also like Radical Candor,
Yes.
which I think is excellent as well. But Crucial Conversations, if you have a job,
Yes.
if you interact with people at all in family or in the outside world, it is a great skill to have, being able to have a crucial conversation. So important. Sarah, how do people follow your journey to space? How do they get in touch with you? And are there any parting thoughts that you have as we're wrapping up this podcast today?
Thank you, Renee. Well, Sarah the Pivoter is my handle on all social media. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. My surname is Kalmeta, Sarah Kalmeta. You'll find it in the show notes. And my website is super difficult. It's sarahkalmeta.com. So if you'd like to connect with me, you can find out more on any of those platforms. Send me a message. I love to connect with people. And if you are a relentless truth seeker like me, I'd love to hear from you.
That's amazing. Sarah, thank you so much for being here, for all the nuggets of wisdom that you've dropped today. I just am really inspired by your tenacity to pursue your dream and your willingness to step outside your comfort zone to do that. I know you're courageous anyway, but it's a little bit daunting to just put it out there and say you're going to do it and then pursue it. But I know you will, and probably sooner than later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Renee. It's been a pleasure to be here again.
Awesome. Well, if you've enjoyed this show today, would you please give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to it? Would love to hear from you. I'm always interested to meet new potential guests for the podcast. Would love to have them be in aviation or passionate about aviation. That's really important to me. And you can follow me at René Banglesdorf on social platforms. See you again soon.